For months, faint whispers had drifted through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, hushed conversations behind closed doors, subtle changes in official portraits, unexplained absences at key royal events. What began as quiet curiosity soon grew into a relentless wave of public speculation. And then, the moment the world never truly believed would come arrived. The looks exchanged at state dinners, the sudden omissions in court circulars, the carefully crafted no-comment replies, it had all been pointing to something unspoken, something deeply guarded. Princess Catherine has finally stepped forward and broken her silence. Her voice, calm and measured, yet unmistakably marked by sorrow, carried through the private room where she stood, and then far beyond the palace grounds. There was no dramatic flourish, no theatrics, only the steady, fragile strength of a woman torn between her role as a future queen and her role as a mother. In that moment, every eye in the room, and soon every eye across the nation, was fixed on her. What she revealed was not simply emotional, it was devastating. Her words confirmed the fears that had been quietly circling behind palace doors for months, a reality that no carefully worded press release, no polished public statement could ever fully contain. The room in which she spoke was never meant to be a stage. Its heavy doors were designed to shut out the world, soundproofed, guarded, impenetrable to cameras and microphones. Only a handful of people had been allowed inside, a few trusted aides, the most senior courtiers and select members of the royal family. Yet what unfolded within those gilded walls would soon echo far beyond Buckingham Palace, reverberating across continents. Princess Catherine stood at the center of the room. She was poised, elegant as always, but close observers could see the strain in her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around the sheet of paper she held. She began to read from a handwritten statement. Every word was chosen with deliberate care, not merely to inform the public, but to open a window into something profoundly personal, raw, and deeply human. Before we continue and unpack the full depth of what Catherine revealed, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have clicked the notification bell. Each like, each comment, and each share helps us bring you closer to the truth behind these rare, historic royal moments as they unfold in real time. As Catherine spoke, her voice carried a unique blend of authority and vulnerability. She was not only addressing the nation as the Princess of Wales, she was speaking as a mother. For the first time, she acknowledged concerns about Prince Louis's health. The word condition was used sparingly, spoken slowly, and framed with extraordinary care. It was neither fully defined nor outright dismissed, and yet that single word hung in the air with immense gravity. It silenced the room. Even those who had spent decades in royal service, hardened by protocol and used to crisis management, felt the impact. There was a subtle tremor in Catherine's tone, not the tremor of someone breaking down, but of someone balancing on a knife's edge, between her public duty and her most primal instinct to protect her child. Strength and fragility, duty and love, all existed in the same breath. Inside the palace, aides later described the silence as almost physical, a pressure that seemed to settle over the room and seep into the very walls. Even the long, echoing corridors of Buckingham Palace felt unnaturally still, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Prince William, normally the picture of composure during public engagements, struggled to mask his emotions. After Catherine finished, he stepped away from the gathering, leaving behind an aura of heavy, unmistakable solemnity. Princess Anne, the royal family's famously stoic workhorse, was, according to those present, visibly shaken. A woman known for her iron composure, for rarely indulging in displays of emotion, had to steady herself. Within minutes of Catherine's statement, the palace's internal communication system erupted. Phones rang non-stop, emails flew between departments, private lines connected advisors, lawyers, and senior royals. National news networks broke into regular programming with breaking headlines. International media scrambled to verify, contextualize, and understand what had just taken place. The royal family's long-standing rule of never complain, never explain had been shaken, and the person who had done it was the very figure the public trusted most, Princess Catherine. On social media, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Hashtags with Prince Louis's name trended globally. People from every corner of the world sent messages of love, strength, and hope. Parents of chronically ill or neurodivergent children especially expressed a deep, almost visceral empathy. And yet, inside the palace, the mood remained heavy, thick with grief, anxiety, and uncertainty. To understand why Catherine's words hit the monarchy at its core, we must step back and look at the signs that had been quietly accumulating over time. They were always there, subtle, almost imperceptible, but to those who watched the royal family closely, they were impossible to ignore. Prince Louis's absence at certain key events. Family photos where his presence felt oddly obscured or edited. Official appearances where his name was listed, but he never appeared. During the royal Easter celebration, for instance, Prince Louis's name had reportedly appeared on an early version of the official itinerary. Yet when the family arrived, smiled for the cameras, and attended the service, Louis was nowhere to be seen. At first, it was brushed off as a simple oversight. Perhaps he wasn't feeling well, perhaps plans had changed. But then it happened again. From Christmas carol services to balcony appearances at major events, a quiet pattern began to form. While his siblings, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, were present, waving, smiling, and speaking to well-wishers, Louis seemed to drift further into the margins. He wasn't just missing from events, he was missing from the narrative. The tension reached a new level with the photograph that would later be dubbed Portrait Gate. It was meant to be a warm, polished family portrait of the Waleses, a symbol of stability and unity at a time when the monarchy needed reassurance. William and Catherine smiled, George and Charlotte stood by their side. The lighting was soft, the composition deliberate. But one glaring absence overshadowed everything: Prince Louis. At first, the palace offered no explanation, but the internet noticed fast. Experts in digital forensics and photography began to examine the image. Online communities dissected every detail: the spacing of the figures, the angle of the shadows, the line of sight of each child. Was someone edited out? Was the original composition altered? Social media lit up with speculation. It wasn't just that Louis was physically absent. It was that, in a photo meant to represent a complete family, he had seemingly been erased. Every missing smile, every absent handhold at public events, every instance where his name appeared on a program, but his face never appeared in the crowd, all of it began to look less like coincidence and more like the outline of a much deeper story. A story of hidden struggle, of quiet battles, of a family dealing with something they did not yet have the words or the freedom to share. Princess Catherine's statement finally cut through the fog. It brought clarity, yes, but also something more powerful: humanity. She reminded the public, perhaps more effectively than any royal has done in recent memory, that behind the crowns, the grandeur, and the balcony waves, there are parents lying awake at night, hearts heavy with worry for their children. Within hours of Catherine's emotional address, the palace attempted to regain control of the narrative. A short, extremely cautious written statement was released. Prince Louis is enjoying a quieter time at home. On the surface, the words felt benign, almost soothing, but for many, the bland phrasing raised more alarm than reassurance. What kind of quiet keeps a young prince from appearing in family portraits and at key public events? Why this sudden framing, after months of unexplained absences and growing speculation? The statement answered nothing. Instead, it inflamed curiosity and concern. Reporters pressed for more detail. Commentators debated the meaning of quieter time on air. Parents of children with medical or developmental needs recognized the familiar euphemisms. Inside the palace, the atmosphere tightened. Subtle inconsistencies began emerging in the official schedules. Early drafts of royal diaries, seen by some within the institution, had Prince Louis listed for several upcoming events. Yet, when the updated versions were released to the public, his name had quietly vanished. Aides who had previously accepted these absences at face value now found themselves uneasy. Some noticed that Catherine herself had become more withdrawn, choosing to forgo certain lighter public appearances. She was seen less frequently at casual engagements, yet palace drivers and security were quietly dispatched for discreet, tightly managed private visits. Those visits, it would later be suggested, aligned almost exactly with Louis's most notable absences. The places Catherine was going were not theaters, galleries, or fashion events. They were medical facilities, specialist clinics, pediatric departments, and centers known only to those who needed them. Even the tabloids, usually quick to sensationalize royal stories, began to shift their tone. What had started as gossip about a missing prince, about retouched photos, evolved into something more serious. Well-connected royal correspondence with years of palace access began asking quieter, sharper questions. Press briefings became terse. Palace communications grew more controlled, more minimal, more defensive. Yet despite the tightening grip on information, it was clear that something enormous and fragile was unfolding behind those ornate gates. The tipping point came with a single image. Catherine was photographed leaving a back entrance of a high-security pediatric center. She was alone, apart from her security. No Prince William at her side, no entourage of officials, no attempt at a public-facing smile. Her head was bowed, the vehicles surrounding her were unmarked. There were no children visible, no sign of Louis, just a mother leaving a building where the walls are built to hold the secrets of the most vulnerable. The palace did not comment. They could not easily explain away what that photograph communicated in a heartbeat. The public didn't need words. They understood something serious was happening. Then came the mistake that would shatter the palace's carefully constructed wall of privacy. One misfiled document, never meant to leave the palace's internal system, slipped into the wrong hands. It was a small error, bureaucratic in nature, but its impact was seismic. Inside the document was a single, unmistakable name, Prince Louis. Alongside it, a brief but unmistakably sensitive annotation and a direct link to his ongoing medical oversight. The leak triggered immediate panic. Phones rang throughout the night. Senior staff were summoned from their homes. Legal teams drafted potential responses and braced for media fallout. But by the time the institution had fully grasped what had happened, the public had already caught a glimpse of the truth that had been so carefully hidden. The document did not read like salacious gossip. It read like a medical briefing. It referenced ongoing pediatric monitoring. It listed technical notes, devoid of emotion yet heavy with implication. Phrases like progressive markers, longitudinal observation, and neurodevelopmental tracking were scattered throughout the text. These were not the words of a family PR team. They were the words of doctors and specialists quietly caring for a child under intense, silent scrutiny. There were no headlines in the document, no drama, no opinion, just facts. And that, more than anything, made it devastating. Within the palace, controlled chaos unfolded. Staff were reprimanded. Access to internal systems was tightened overnight. Digital security protocols were overhauled, and physical documents were locked down under stricter supervision than ever. The monarchy's famed discretion had not been breached by scandalous behavior or by a rebellious royal. It had been pierced by a simple human error, an administrative oversight with world-shaking consequences. King Charles convened an emergency meeting with senior royals and key advisors. It was held in one of the palace's most secure rooms, the very place where crises are managed and history-altering decisions quietly made. Every chair was occupied except one, Catherine Erse. Her absence did not go unnoticed. In fact, it became the unspoken center of the room. Was she refusing to participate? Was this a silent protest? Or was this the line she had drawn, choosing to remain beside her son rather than sit in yet another room where decisions were made about him? To some, it felt like a calculated step. To others, it was simply the raw instinct of a mother. If her child was under scrutiny, she would not be. Inside that room, decorum frayed. Voices rose. Long-buried tensions surfaced. Princess Anne, who for decades had embodied discipline and duty, reportedly left the room in tears, an almost unthinkable image for those who knew her as unshakable. At the heart of the confrontation was not politics, not succession, not image. It was Prince Louis, his well-being, his privacy, and the truth that had been selectively withheld not just from the public, but from some within the family itself. The arguments were immediate and unfiltered. Protocol could not contain the rawness of what was at stake. Through the storm of secrecy, one message emerged with clarity. Behind the spectacle of monarchy, there was a deeply human story unfolding. It was a story of love and protection, of a mother at odds with an institution, of a child whose name had become a flashpoint for a battle between transparency and tradition. Within Buckingham Palace, maternal instinct was colliding, hard, with centuries of royal control. The world watched only fragments of this reality, but even those fragments were enough to move millions to empathy rather than judgment. As the medical leaks circled the globe and commentary proliferated, the British public, and people far beyond the UK, found themselves feeling not just curiosity, but genuine compassion for a family that, for all its wealth and privilege, was facing something profoundly universal: fear for a child. Just hours after the the tension in Buckingham Palace was almost electric. Every aide, every senior staff member understood they were living through a defining moment, one that would be dissected, debated, and remembered. The leak had done more than expose a file. It had punctured the myth of total control. Into this charged atmosphere walked Princess Anne. For decades, Anne has been regarded as the monarchy's steadiest force, a defender of protocol, a woman who simply gets on with the job. But that day, she was not there to uphold tradition. She was there to challenge it. She strode into a senior strategy meeting without being formally invited. It was a breach of etiquette that, under normal circumstances, would have turned heads. This time, no one dared stop her. Her expression was sharp, unwavering. There was no trace of politeness for politeness' sake. She carried a folder in her hand, the very kind used to circulate internal documents. Anne positioned herself directly before King Charles. When she spoke, she did not soften her words. "You've silenced Catherine," she reportedly said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "And in doing so, you've failed Louis, you've failed all of us." The room fell utterly still. Staff members who had spent careers immersed in royal decorum, used to measured tone and careful phrasing, were stunned. This was not the quiet, composed Princess Anne they knew from official engagements. This was Anne, the sister, the aunt, the woman who had watched her family repeat the same cycles of secrecy and emotional distance for decades. Her usual composure fractured in plain view. She slammed the folder she was carrying onto the polished table. Inside were her own copies of the leaked documents, printed, studied, annotated. Each page was a silent accusation, a record of a truth that had been hidden, postponed, or selectively revealed. King Charles, momentarily caught off guard, attempted to reassert control. His voice, calm but cold, sought to reframe the conversation. "Not everything needs to be known, Anne," he replied, measured. "Not by them and not by the world." But the familiar argument, that privacy is protection, that secrecy is necessary, no longer soothed, not in this context, not when a child, his struggles and his future were at the center. Instead of de-escalating, Charles's words ignited something deeper. Anne's response came with a tremor, not of weakness, but of contained anger, pain, and unyielding loyalty to her family's youngest members. Her voice shook not because she was unsure, but because, for perhaps the first time in many years, she was allowing herself to truly feel the full weight of what was happening. And when your people no longer trust you, what then? What remains of a throne built on silence? The words hung in the air like a challenge. The room went utterly still. No one moved, no one coughed, no one dared shuffle a paper or touch a pen. Advisors glanced at one another, uncertain whether to speak, to interrupt, or to simply look away. Protocol, that invisible force that usually ruled these rooms, lay shattered on the floor. This was not a policy debate. This was not a discussion about optics or strategy. This was deeply, painfully personal. Here stood a sister, Princess Anne, facing her brother, the king, not as a subject to a sovereign but as family to family. She was not demanding obedience. She was demanding accountability, honesty, and a measure of moral courage that the institution had been avoiding for generations. Anne left the room shortly afterward. Her shoulders were stiff, her movements measured, but her face, usually composed to the point of impenetrability, was streaked with tears. There was no dramatic gesture, no final word. Instead, her expression softened into a kind of quiet, unshakable resolve. She didn't have to say anything more. Her choice was clear. She had chosen truth over tradition. Some who witnessed her departure later said she walked straight through the palace corridors, past portraits of monarchs and marble busts, and went directly to Catherine's private rooms. Perhaps she went to offer guidance, perhaps simply to sit with her, perhaps to say wordlessly, "You are not alone." Behind those closed doors, away from the clamor of advisors and the unblinking gaze of the institution, Catherine was preparing her next move, final, irreversible, and profoundly personal. In a quiet corner of her private quarters, in a drawer tucked beneath layers of family photographs and mementos, a handwritten letter was discovered. It was not addressed to the public. It was not crafted by press officers or communications staff. It was a deeply intimate note, never intended to be seen by the world, and certainly not meant at that precise moment for her husband, Prince William, to read. Yet he did. The opening line of the letter set the tone with brutal honesty and vulnerability. "If you found this, then I never had the strength to say it aloud." Those words unlocked a flood. What followed on the pages was a tidal wave of emotion, grief, love, frustration, and a fierce, unyielding determination. It was the internal monologue of a woman who had been carrying more than anyone could see. Catherine detailed nights that felt endless, spent at Louis's bedside watching his breathing, listening for the smallest sound that might signal distress. She wrote about consultations with specialists flown in quietly under pseudonyms so their appearance would not tip off the press, experts whose names could never appear in official diaries. She described the crushing weight of having to walk out of those consultations, wipe away tears, step into a waiting car, and smile for flashing cameras. Public easiness, private collapse. She did not only write of her own pain, she wrote of William's too. According to the letter, he had been crumbling in his own quiet way, unable to show it, unwilling to share it, trapped between the rigid demands of royal duty and the tender, terrified instincts of a father. She described how, after long days filled with handshakes, speeches, and carefully planned engagements, William's hands would tremble when the doors finally closed and the cameras were gone. How late at night he would sit in Louis's room for long stretches, sometimes speaking, sometimes not, just watching, listening, trying to forge a connection beyond the reach of words. There were the sleepless nights when neither of them knew what the next test result might say. The minutes stretched into small eternities, when they waited for doctors to walk into rooms with expressions that told the story before a single word was spoken. Catherine wrote of how even then, even under that strain, William had deferred again and again to the machinery, to palace strategy, to protocol, to the calculus of what the monarchy could or could not withstand. Not because he did not care, but because, like all of them, he had been raised to place the institution first. The letter was not a cry for attention. It was something far more enduring, an act of legacy. A record in her own handwriting of what it meant to be a mother inside an institution that expected perfection while she battled fear in private. A message for William, and perhaps one day for their children, explaining why she could no longer keep silent. One line in particular seared itself into the page and into William's memory. "He is slipping away, and they want me to smile." Those 11 words captured everything, the unbearable tension between the image demanded of her and the reality she was living. The expectation that she remain composed, gracious, radiant in public, while behind closed doors she felt her grip on normalcy, on certainty weakening day by day. The letter reached William days before Catherine stepped before the cameras. He had retreated to Sandringham, to the very estate where he had spent so much of his childhood, running across wet lawns, riding horses, laughing with his brother, unaware of the weight that life would later place on his shoulders. Now he sat alone in one of its quiet rooms, the letter in his hands. Staff brought in food and tea, but he barely touched any of it. Hours slipped by unmarked. The ticking of a clock, the rustle of paper, the distant sound of wind against old window panes, these were the only witnesses as he read and reread Catherine's words. Those who saw him during that time described him as pale, drawn, utterly hollowed out. There was no anger in his face, only a painful recognition, the realization that the palace's plan, its insistence on managed narratives and controlled disclosures, could no longer be allowed to outrank the truth of what his family was enduring. Something shifted between them in that moment. William stopped resisting Catherine's instincts. He stopped pushing back against her decisions to speak, to reveal, to own their story instead of allowing others to twist it. He stepped aside, not in weakness, but in a profound act of trust. He allowed her voice to be heard. In that private decision, the personal triumphed over protocol, and though there were no grand declarations, no official acknowledgement, the monarchy experienced a quiet but seismic internal shift. For once, the family's private truth outranked the institution's fear of vulnerability. The palace corridors, already buzzing with anxiety and speculation, were about to be overwhelmed by a storm no one could fully control. Because Catherine's letter was not only confession, it was also a plea for truth, a plea for recognition. Above all, a plea for her son. She was not asking for sympathy for herself, nor for special treatment. She was asking that Louis be seen, not as a symbol, not as a distant royal child hidden behind closed doors, but as a boy facing real challenges, deserving of understanding rather than rumor. But even as her resolve hardened, the machinery of monarchy continued to grind into motion, clinging desperately to its old instincts, perfection, silence, control. And then from far outside those palace walls, someone unexpected moved. A figure the institution had long tried to squeeze out of the narrative. A man branded as estranged, criticized, scrutinized, and often dismissed. Prince Harry. For years, Harry had been at the center of exile, interviews, and headlines. He had watched his relationship with his family fracture in public view. From across an ocean, he had seen the monarchy close ranks, deny, spin, and neatly package painful realities. And now, watching the media frenzy around Prince Louis, the endless headlines, the speculation, the invasive analysis of Catherine's movements, he recognized something that cut too close to home. This was the same cycle, the same suffocating silence, the same instinct to protect the crown by sacrificing the person. From thousands of miles away in California, Harry made a decision. He did not wait for protocol. He did not consult lawyers, advisors, or palace channels. He picked up the phone and called Catherine directly. The moment her phone lit up with his name, Catherine froze for a heartbeat. It was not a call she had expected. Her mind rushed through years of history, shared laughter, shared grief, distance, tension, public fallout. For a moment she hesitated. Surprise flickered first, then caution, then something else. Hope, perhaps, or the memory of a time when conversations between them had been simple and unguarded. She answered. Harry didn't speak as a prince. He didn't speak as a critic of the institution. He spoke as someone who had walked through the same corridors of silence and felt the walls closing in. Softly but firmly, he told her, "I know what it's like to be kept in the dark." A pause. "You have to tell them, they'll never understand if you don't." For 37 minutes, they spoke without interruption. No aides listened in. No calls were recorded. No one stood in the corner taking notes. It was just two people, connected across an ocean, bound by shared experience, grief, fear, pressure, and a determination not to let the next generation endure what they had. Catherine did more listening than talking. She absorbed his words, the tone behind them, the mixture of empathy and urgency. This was Harry asking her to make a statement for him, or to settle old scores. This was Harry trying to break a cycle that had scarred them both in different ways. In Montecito, Meghan was reportedly tense when she learned of the call. Sources suggested there were difficult conversations, reminders of why they had left in the first place, how intervention in royal affairs, even with good intentions, always came at a cost. But for Harry, in that moment, it was not about dividing lines. It was not about whose side anyone was on. It was about a child. He saw in Louis's story a reflection of his own past, secrets kept to protect the crown, emotional reality traded for public narrative, a sense of never fully owning his own story. Later, Catherine would describe Harry's words as the nudge I needed. She would admit privately that she had been close to pulling back yet again, close to allowing the palace pressure, the subtle threats, the emotional manipulation to quiet her. For all her strength, the weight upon her had been immense. But after that call, something changed. She was no longer pushing alone against a fortress. Someone outside the walls had reached in, not to attack, but to pull her forward. Not out of revenge, out of understanding. The ripple effect did not end there. Harry's decision to reach out stirred something in William. Whatever resentment, disappointment, or hurt lingered between the brothers, there was a shared foundation that could not be fully erased. They had both been the frightened children at the heart of the world's curiosity. They had both watched the institution swallow pain and spit out polished statements. William picked up the phone. For the first time in months, the two brothers spoke directly. No aides patched them through. No intermediaries softened their words. The conversation did not magically fix years of damage. There were no instant reconciliations or sweeping apologies, but the call reopened a door that had long been bolted shut. It allowed, for the first time in a long time, the possibility of movement rather than permanent stalemate. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, pressure reached breaking point. Just hours before Catherine was due to make her public statement, King Charles made an unprecedented move. Insiders have described his actions as desperate, dramatic, and to some, teetering on the edge of constitutional impropriety. At 2:43 a.m., when most of the country slept, a confidential, encrypted directive was sent from the king's legal team to multiple arms of the royal administration. The subject line alone was chilling in its urgency. Immediate containment protocol, category red. Within those words lay its mission, Stop. Catherine. The objective was unambiguous: to prevent the Princess of Wales from delivering her planned public address about Louis and the family's private struggle. The justification offered was stark. The directive questioned Catherine's emotional stability, suggesting she was acting outside the broader interests of the monarchy. In essence, it sought to undermine her credibility, to paint her as a liability rather than a leader, and to reclaim control of the narrative by silencing the one person at its center. Her voice, her authority as a mother, and her role as a senior royal were all quietly placed on the table as things to be neutralized, if necessary, overruled. Even among seasoned advisors, people who had spent their careers navigating the gray areas of royal power, there was hesitation. This was not standard crisis management. This was suppression in real time. A collision between an old instinct to bury the difficult truth and a new reality in which the public would no longer calmly accept half-stories and euphemisms. When efforts to contain Catherine directly faltered, the pressure pivoted to William. He was summoned urgently, pulled into an early hours briefing that stretched toward dawn. Around him, documents were laid out, consequences outlined, constitutional risks whispered, reputations weighed. He was urged bluntly, almost brutally, to intervene. To stop his wife. To talk her down. To convince her to step back from the brink before her statement became a point of no return for both their family and the institution that defined their lives. The plea was simple in structure, yet loaded in implication. Choose the crown, or choose her.